Hello, welcome to the MuseScore Café for today, April 17th, 2019. My name is Marc Sabatella. I'm the Director of Education for MuseScore, and this is a weekly series of kind of informal chats that I do. You're welcome to be, if you're watching live, to be participating in the chat. I usually pick a topic and kind of talk about that, take whatever questions come up about that topic or anything else. And the topic that I've chosen for today is MuseScore 3.1, the beta release that we just put out last week. So by a beta release means that we've implemented a whole lot of things that we think are going to be good to go for MuseScore 3.1, which is we're hoping to release MuseScore 3.1 in a couple more weeks. This beta release is a chance for people to test it out, make sure we didn't break anything, make sure everything works as it should. So it's a somewhat bigger release. We had MuseScore 3.0, then we had 3.0.1, 0.02, 03, 04, 05. Those are minor releases that fix a few bugs, more than a few bugs actually, maybe introduce some new stuff. 3.1 isn't a huge release like MuseScore 3 was, but it's a bit more significant in some of the changes under the hood, and so that's it. It behooves us to have more testing. So anyhow, I want to show some of the stuff, and that reminds me, I had made some notes about things that I wanted to make sure I talked about. So the big new thing from a user perspective that we now support is single note dynamics is what is the term we've been using for it. The idea that we've always supported, well, I shouldn't say always, since MuseScore 2, we've supported crescendos from note to note, like you're going to hear here. That crescendo there has been supported for a while. What is going to be brand new is our support for things like this. The forte piano followed by the crescendo into this, into the double forte here, or this crescendo and decrescendo within the long notes. And let me play the whole passage so you can hear what that sounds like. There you go. So that's the basics of single note dynamics, and it's all set up to work pretty automatically. So if you just load up a score into the beta, or if you create a score in it, these things should work. There's some glitches of things that don't work and that we're still working on that'll be fixed before release, but basically that's what there is to it. There's also some customizations possible for this sort of thing. So like this crescendo here, this crescendo seemed a little too fast to me. Feels like it's too loud already. There's some customizations in the inspector for how these crescendos work, and that's worth knowing. So the default linear one, there's these other methods here that have to do with controlling, well, how fast does it actually increase? And so you can experiment with things like that. That one also, it feels like, in fact, all of them just seem like they are. So let me just go to all of them and say all similar elements. And then I'm going to pick all of them to be this ease. I'm going to pick ease in and ease out. To be honest, I don't fully understand these yet. I'm still working on wrapping my brain around some of how the single note dynamic ones work. And so there's just different schemes for how that works. There's subtle differences, but they make a difference if you're really trying to get the most out of your playback. I want to play a sample score. So this feature was introduced by a gentleman from the United Kingdom, James Thistlewood. This is that's him here. This demo, I believe, I forget if it's, I think it's going to be shipped with MuseScore in the demos folder. But anyhow, I'll just play some of this. So that gives you an idea of some of the things that you can be doing, with the playback of with the playback of these single note dynamics. So face is over. Yes, it is. You're right. Okay, so all right, let me fix that. Good point. If I'm going to be showing the inspector, I will say bye-bye to my face. There we go. All right, so the thing that I was showing here is when you select a hairpin and then you scroll down to the bottom of the inspector, there's this control here for dynamics method that allows you to pick different ways of how it's going to interpret that crescendo. So that there's things to learn about how that works. But anyhow, that's the basic feature. And again, it just sort of works out of the box. You enter your notes and you get. So that's one of the big new features. Another of the new features that was introduced that was sort of a little under the radar, because this one has been requested forever, and it's been worked on for a long time. James put an incredible amount of work into putting this together. Really hats off to him. And also S. Christian Collins, who made the sound font modifications. I have to give kudos to him. For the modifications he made to the sound fonts to support this, because if you know anything about MIDI, it normally doesn't really allow for dynamic changes within a note. Normally it's how hard you press a note on the keyboard that controls how loud it is. But there are ways of using MIDI to increase and decrease the volume of notes after they've been struck, but it requires more work to make that happen. Most synthesizers don't do that out of the box, but including most software synthesizers, I don't know about most, but anyhow, ours didn't. And S. Christian Collins implemented all the work necessary to get our sound font to support the work that James put in to actually making this happen. So that the new sound font by default will support that. It already does. The sound font that comes with MuseScore supports it. There is also, though, if you go to the Help Resource Manager, you will find there is now this MuseScore General HQ, high quality sound font, that supports additional options and has some other additional improvements in the strings and piano, I think, specifically. I'm not totally sure what all is in that sound font, but it's a bigger sound font. It's optional. You can load it, and it has additional support. There's also some things in View Synthesizer. Notice now you can see I've already installed that HQ sound font. You don't need it. It works without it, the single note dynamics, but this just gives some additional improvements. Now this is all MIDI mumbo jumbo stuff here that lets you pick how it's actually implementing this change in volume within a single note. It uses what's called continuous controllers, and there's different ones that can be used, and that's some of the work that S. Christian Collins did to allow these different controllers to be used to control things. I think one of them was supported already, and he added the others. I'm a little fuzzy on those details, to be honest. So anyhow, that's single note dynamics. So I was starting to talk about this other feature that sort of came in under the radar. That's kind of a cool feature also. So I've got this score here. There's not much to it, but as you can see, it has 4 repeated bars, and that's great. When you're writing stuff out, repeats are useful. There are situations where you might want to have a version where instead of having a repeat sign around those 4 bars, you actually want those repeats written out. Like maybe you need it to be slightly different the second time. And so maybe for playback, it's okay to have it look this way, but you know that you want this passage to be played the second time only. Well, MuseScore doesn't have a built-in way to play this the second time only, or to play it different dynamics the first time and second time. Marc, you say it doesn't work without the new sound font. As I mentioned, there are some glitches in how this worked currently that are already being resolved, but it should be the case that if you've installed the actual beta version with its sound font that it comes with and create a new score, it should work, but only for instruments that actually can do single note dynamics. I mean, piano inherently doesn't do that, so the piano instrument doesn't. And then if you change instrument from piano to another one, it doesn't pick up that change. So you have to actually create a new score for the instruments that you want, which is what I did. When I created this example here, I did not have that sound font installed, and it worked just fine. But you have to actually create the score for it. So anyhow, let me come back to my unrolling example. So maybe the second time you want it to not play, you want one instrument not to play, or you want the dynamics to be different. So there's a new feature in here that just says, I don't think I have to select anything actually. I'm just going to go to Tools, Unroll Repeats, and what it does is it creates a new score for me that actually has that repeated section now written out in full. So instead of having the original version, which had repeat signs around it, now it's written out in full. So for playback purposes, now you can tweak this and say, oh, I want it played differently the second time. You can just edit it here. And so the playback, you can use this version for the playback while still using, whoops, this was another version I unrolled when I was testing the feature. Come back over here. I'm rearranging my tabs. So for printing the score, you might want to use the version with repeats, but for playback, you might want to use this version, and it should work. Even with things like DSs and so forth. For instance, this brassed up demo. Let's give it a shot. This has a DS Alcoda here. Does it have any other repeats? So there's the DS. All right, let's see what happens if I do unroll on this guy. I haven't tried it. Hopefully it doesn't crash on me. There we go. It wrote the thing out, and the spot where there was a DS was right here, and instead it is now actually made a copy of the part that was the DS part, which is here. So it wrote it all out for me, so I can make it be different on the DS just by editing this version. So my playback can be the way I want it. So both of those features have to do with playback improvements. I mean, this isn't just about playback. There might be other reasons you want to unroll it, but to me, that feels like one of the most likely, the common use cases that someone might have. Let me kind of run over some of the other features. Another new thing that I talked about last week, but I will show it again this week because it's actually pretty interesting also. All right, so we've already discovered a bug that I've submitted a fix for. So let me just make one little thing that I need to do here. I'm going to take all those hairpins and delete them because this isn't going to work otherwise. All right, I'm going to select all this thing. And what if we decided, gee, instead of writing this out in cut time, the way we did here, maybe we would rather write it out as this is a quarter note and those are 16th notes. Just say. So we now have a command that will do exactly that. What I can do is select that and then just use the half duration command. The shortcut is Control-Shift-Q, or I can go here, and really what it does is paste. So you need to first copy the selection. So let me select all and then copy, or I can cut and actually remove it. And now I'm going to paste half duration. Boom, there it is. So as you remember, this was a whole note tied to a whole note. That was a half note. Those were eighth notes. If I do a couple of undos here, hopefully you can remember that that's what it was. Whole note to whole note, half note, and a bunch of eighths. But when I redo, you can see everything got halved. And it works quite well out of the box, but pretty quickly someone realized that crescendos and certain other lines. Slurs work fine, but other lines weren't working right. They weren't shrinking or growing as they should. So I've got a fix pending for that. We'll have that fixed before the release. So that's another feature. And then there was also, if you should want it, a double duration paste. So there you go. There's the double duration paste. So that has also been a feature that people have been requesting for literally years. So that's been a pretty big deal. Beyond that, those are the main new features that are really kind of maybe important to know about. But there's some other changes that I would like to talk about, because one of them is is, well, I think I'll talk first about when I said under the hood. The big thing that actually happened within MuseScore is we're changing, internally how we represent time, is the best way to describe it. MuseScore has been previously very based on MIDI, which has a concept of what they call ticks. I don't know if that term comes from MIDI. It's our term also, but where like the length of a quarter note is a certain number. It's 480 ticks. Why 480? Because it's divisible by a lot of things. So you can make triplets out of it. You can make quintuplets out of it. But 480 is not divisible by 7. So if you ever want to create a septuplet from a quarter note, we'll do it. But each note of that septuplet, because it's not evenly, 7 doesn't go evenly into 480, the lengths of those notes are not the same, and there's some round off error. Some of the notes will be, one note will be a tick longer than the others, and it created all sorts of havoc where, like, if you tried to copy and paste a tuplet, sometimes it would screw up or create a corrupted file because the numbers just didn't add up right because of all this rounding off that happens. And this has been an ongoing problem for MuseScore for years. So Werner Schwer, the originator of MuseScore, that has been something that's been on his radar for a long time, is something he's really wanted to work on. And he's been working on it, and a couple months ago, while we were working, 3.02, 03, whatever, he said, okay, this is ready. But it was a big change. So the change that I'm talking about is we no longer call this thing 480 ticks. It is now represented as a fraction, 1/4 of a measure, or whatever the 1/4. Yeah, I think that's how it works. And so we do all this math involving fractions now instead of math involving like 480 ticks. Now this thing is 1/4, and you can multiply and divide fractions. So if I want to create a septuplet here internally, it's represented as 1/128th, because that's a 4th divided by 7. And so it makes all the calculations much more exact, and it will be eliminating a lot of the subtle bugs that would show up with corruption involving tuplets when you would copy and paste them, or just other sorts of things that could go wrong. It really eliminates a lot of little subtle problems, but it was a big change. It involved a lot of changes all throughout the code, so we were a little afraid that, oh, this is a big change. Now, the reality is, since we made that change, Werner did an amazing job. I mean, we've uncovered almost no new bugs as a result, but we really want people testing the beta to make sure, because we did find one so far during the beta. One bug so far has come up as a result of that change. It's already been identified, already had a fix submitted, but that was a big change under the hood. The other thing that you might want to know about, if you haven't seen it already, I will put in a little plug for this. So there's this gentleman whose name his handle is Tentacruel. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that, but he produces videos doing user interface design, or reviewing user interfaces of different programs. And he did one of Sibelius a few months ago that was very, very popular, and it was very critical of their design. And then by popular request, he did a poll to say what program should he do next, and MuseScore was the #1 pick. So he did a review of MuseScore's user interface, which is very entertaining, I have to say. He produces very entertaining videos. They're very critical, but entertainingly so. His review of MuseScore was pretty fair, and it wasn't all that critical, but he goes over the top with his criticisms. That's my observation about it. Yeah, let me put on just a moment of it, because I want to point out something else about 3.1. I think we have to skip past the little ad here. Here we go. All right. So
the time playing with it, I found that the way it's organized is actually really good.
So there you go. It's actually really good. But there's things, and he talks about things. Wait a minute, where's the part? I get to be featured very briefly, and it's pretty funny. Here we go. There we go. He's this Shostakovich. Oh, he hates the ad for my course. Oh, there we go. But it's not just about that. He's complaining about the design of these icons. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like the design of that mixer interface. And he talks about some of those features later. Anyhow, when I say they're entertaining, this is what I mean. And so, yeah, they're critical, but he raises a lot of good points. So let me put in... I'm going to put in a link to this page, because if you're going to watch the video, you should see our page where we're tracking our responses. So I'm just going to stick this into the chat. Helps to click in here. There we go. So, the video is there. It's pretty long. You watch it and you get a lot of insight into a lot of things. So what we've done is gone through and figured out, like, what are some of the specific places. Actually, I did a lot of this. A few other people did also, where we identify some of the specific spots where he talks about particular features that he thinks could be improved. Mostly, it's not about how the feature. Well, it is about how it works, but it's how it works from a user interface design perspective, mostly. You know, how these icons are laid out, or when you do this command, it should do this other thing afterwards. I don't know. It's hard to explain what's like this one. Select a note on deleting of the slur. So he points out that in Sibelius, if you click a slur and delete it, it leaves you with the note deleted. I mean, the note selected. So in MuseScore 3, which he was reviewing, if I select this slur and hit delete, if this was MuseScore 3.0, nothing would be selected after I hit delete. But you can see, well, you can see if I zoom in 3.1, we now have it so it selects the first note for you. Why? Because it seems like a good idea. You might have wanted to add another slur there, maybe a different slur. He used the example that maybe he wanted a shorter slur, and yes, you can double click this slur and use the arrow to adjust its length, and that's what we're accustomed to doing. But he says, rightly so, that it's actually faster to just delete it, and add a new one. Oops, wrong shortcut, S. So delete it and add a new one. But that only works if after deleting it, you leave a note selected. So you can see it's working here. That's because we created this list of the points that he put together, and one by one, we're actually addressing them. So some of them are already implemented, already in 3.1. Some of them are currently being worked on or looked at. Some of them have pending changes that haven't been merged yet, but may very well be before 3.1. So anyhow, this is the sort of thing that's really, I don't know, interesting about open software. This whole process, open source software, this whole process is very open. So we take these sorts of comments very seriously. We take user comments in the forums very seriously. That whole everything about single note dynamics and the half and double time and the unrolling of repeats, that's all based on user feedback is posted in the forums and elsewhere. So that's one of the other things that I wanted to talk about involving MuseScore 3.1. The last thing I guess I want to talk about is a set of things that all fall under the category of quality. So here I'm going to be I'll be frank as I can be about this. There is a widespread perception that MuseScore 3.0 was released maybe sooner than some people would have liked. I mean, everyone wants it as soon as possible, but that maybe it would have been better had we spent longer during the beta period fixing bugs. That's a common perception. I think there's valid reasons why things happened the way they did. I'm not here to debate that. But I will say I recognize that perception that some of the bugs that were there did mean that for some people, updating to MuseScore 3, there were enough things that didn't work that did work before that it felt like, well, we can't really be using this the way we want to be. So what we've done, I mean, we've gradually been fixing bugs all along, from 3.0 to 3.01 to 01 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. Hundreds of bugs have been fixed. Some of them were new bugs in 3.0. Some of them actually were bugs that had been there before. But what I would say is that even as of 3.05, which is the current release, 3.05, that there's a number of areas of the program that sort of fundamentally have enough bugs that, yeah, they're kind of hard to use. I would absolutely agree with that. So a number of us, myself included, went in and just sort of said, well, let's prioritize some of these things and actually fix them. And so that's actually happened for 3.1. So I want to mention a few specific areas where things are drastically improved to the point where anyone who was thinking, you know what, I really can't be using MuseScore 3 because such and such a feature isn't working right. Now things are working much better. So one of them has to do with small staves. If I go to staff properties and mark this staff small, that worked in 3.0, no doubt. But there were a number of issues in how things actually scaled. Like some of the markings didn't get smaller that should have gotten smaller, and a number of things like that just did not work correctly. This is now much more on par. Like I think this marking here didn't get smaller the way it should. So there's a number of things that did not scale correctly when you made things smaller, that and other things that just sort of didn't quite work right about making staves small, that made that feature harder to actually find useful. So we've now made this back on par with how it worked in MuseScore 2. Another one is having to do with bar lines. For instance, try to remember a specific one. If I have parts generated for this, if I go to File, Parts, and I say New All, which is actually one of the buttons Tentacruel makes fun of. He does not like the label on that. It's not a great label, but he goes off on a wild tangent about it. So if I now generate these parts, and I've got these parts, if I add a double bar somewhere, say here, maybe it makes more sense here. I'm going to add it here. That's there after bar 8. You expect it to show up in all the parts, and it now does. That was a bug before where it didn't show up in the parts. Also now, if I decide I want to extend the bar lines through the staves, the double bar extends also. Ooh, oh yeah, it does on the small staff. It's just smaller, so that's why it looks a little funny. But that's the nature of small staves, I guess. There's actually an option somewhere to control whether the bar lines scale, so that if you don't want to see glitches like that, see if I can remember where that is. I'm just curious. I've never actually seen the need for that option before. Bar lines, scale bar lines to staff size. Uncheck that. There we go. That's what that option's for. Ha! So that is a thing that, yeah, when I extended the bar line through here, the double bars that were added, they weren't extending. So there were a lot of little glitches having to do with these things. None of them were insurmountable. Yeah, you could go to the parts and add the double bars individually. You could extend this individually. But collectively speaking, there were enough glitches with bar lines that it was really kind of a drag. Another one has to do with cross-staff notation. There were a number of bugs where if I entered some notes here, and then I decided I'm going to use this feature that maybe some of you don't know about, Control Shift Up. It just moves the notes to the staff above. They still live on this staff, really. You notice there's still a whole rest here, and there's no rest here. These notes belong to this staff, but that's designed so that you can do things like maybe have some of the notes, like I could select just those two and move them and have this kind of situation. So anyhow, that's a feature. And like that particular example I just did, there was a bug where if you moved all the notes up, the beam would disappear. There was another bug where if you had notes that went from one staff to another and you put a slur on them, it wouldn't display right. Now, it's still the case that there's a little collision here, but that's way better than what we were getting before, and you can just edit the thing to, because the collision detection for slurs, the way it works, isn't going to be able to handle that, but you can just edit it there. And it won't always create those collisions, just happen to in this case. So anyhow, there were a lot of little glitches with cross-staff notation that, again, we just sort of took seriously, prioritized, and fixed basically everything to work as well as it did in MuseScore 2 or better. There was another glitch with invisible staves. Some people will add invisible staves to a score so that, for instance, you might just write a note with a trill on it or some other ornament, and MuseScore will try to play back the ornaments, but maybe you don't like its playback, or for whatever other reason, you might want to add an invisible staff with notes that you can hear but not see. As a jazz musician, I use this for my big band arrangements or combo arrangements. I'll have a piano part or I'll have rhythm section parts that are there for display. They're just slashes and chord symbols or whatever else I want to put there. But I'll have another invisible staff that has notes on it and for playback. And in MuseScore 3.0, if you tried adding an invisible staff for playback, I'll make this be a trumpet for whatever reason. If I add an invisible playback staff, so I'll add some notes to the trumpet staff here. Okay, yeah, it's transposed, so that's why that's not a C major scale. So as I added these notes, you see it spaced out the measure. If I make this staff invisible, which I'll do, I'm sorry, I go to I for Edit Instruments, and then make this thing invisible. You want what just happened here. That measure is now small again. In MuseScore 3, that didn't happen. The invisible notes here were still causing that measure to be wide, even though the staff wasn't visible. So it made that whole trick of invisible staves to get interesting playback effects much less useful. So there were a number of other bugs having to do with invisible staves that also we sort of collectively looked at, prioritized, and said, all right, let's really deal with this. So the bottom line is, at this point, and you know, any number of other bugs, there were some bugs with key signatures and timing signatures, extra ones showing up that we kept getting different reports, would one by one fix them, and we think now we've fixed everything we've been able to having to do with that sort of thing. There was some complaints about 3.0 because we didn't support plugins yet, and now the plugins are supported. The performance wasn't as good. Now in page view, it's actually much better. Continuous view still has issues with large scores, but it did in MuseScore 2 also. It's just maybe worse now. But in page view is way better now than MuseScore 2 was. So overall, if you had initial experiences with MuseScore 3 that were maybe less than positive because of some of these sort of basic things that feature areas where there were enough bugs to make this thing feel not the way you wanted it to feel, what I would say is 3.1 is going to be the game changer here. If you're one of these people that says, well, I never want to install version 3.0 of anything, or 7.0 or anything 0.0, yeah, that's part of the reason also for calling this 0.1 release. It's the release in which we've really looked at everything that came out and all the feedback from 3.0 and tried to address it to as large an extent as possible, so that I think this is going to be the release. And we've gotten that feedback on the forums from people who are actually using it, and have been, some of the people who have been some of the most vocal about not being happy with the original status of the 3.0 release, and they are coming on board now saying, okay, I have to hand it to you, 3.1 is finally where I wanted it to be. Now I have to say, I've personally been using 3.0 very happily, but I'm a fanboy. But 3.1 I think is going to be the release that even some of the skeptics are going to come on board with, not just because of the new features, but also because of the attention to quality. So that's kind of my spiel about 3.1. So it's going to be, the beta release happened Friday last week. I should get to the actual page. MuseScore. Oh, I have the page up already. Wait a minute. Here we go. Here's the page, and I'm going to come back to it in a second. Here's the page where you get information about the beta release. So it's just the announcement, and it has links to the downloads for the different operating systems and talks about what the features are, and including a fairly decent description of the dynamics, how this works, And here's where it talks about that ease in, ease out, and this is the unroll repeats. Here's half double duration. So it just talks about some of the things that are actually new or different. And then it gives you the links to download it. So MuseScore 3.1, the beta is out there. You're allowed to test it. Where you're encouraged to test it. So what I will say is go ahead and install it. You can install it right alongside MuseScore 3.0. If you've got 3.05 installed, don't worry about screwing that up. If you're on Windows, when you go through the installer, one of the pages it asks you, to accept the default folder to install in. Well, don't do that. If you don't want to clobber your existing MuseScore 3 installation, just make sure you give it a different name there. So I called mine MuseScore Beta instead of MuseScore 3. And then, so now I have both versions installed. So you can do that, and I think on Mac or Linux, I think maybe that happens automatically. I'm not positive. But anyhow, go ahead and install it, the beta, and start testing it. Now that you see these new features, test them. If you feel like pushing tuplets some, then go ahead and do that and give us feedback. Report it on the forums. If you see something that's absolutely positively a bug and you've got precise steps to reproduce it, go ahead and click the issue tracker link to report the bug directly. That way we can try to get as many of these bugs fixed that are, maybe bugs that were not already reported, maybe new bugs that were introduced as a result of some of the changes, or just ones that hadn't been found yet. We want to get as much fixed before we actually release the official 3.1, which is probably going to be in a couple of weeks. We don't have a firm date on it, but, probably a couple of weeks. So we'd like that official 3.1 release to be the best release we've ever had. That's the goal. That's always the goal. But here, I think it actually is really going to be something. So by all means, please give it a shot, test it out, let us know what you think. Once it's really released, then you'll actually be informed within MuseScore 3. In other words, when you start MuseScore 3, the dialog will pop up and say, an update's available, do you want to update? And the automatic updater will do that. But that's only going to do that once we've released for real. The beta you have to go install separately. So let's see, I've got a couple questions. When will it be released? So a couple weeks. So the bug of crashing. Well, there's always bugs involving crashing. We've fixed dozens of crashing bugs, so I'm not sure which specific crash you might be seeing, but if you've got steps that if you can write up a series of steps and say, here, do this, do this, do this, do this, and then it crashes, then we can take a look and see if we've fixed that particular crash or not. I can tell you, if you look at the release notes for 3.1, let's actually do that, because that's an interesting thing to do. Release notes. This is a complete list of changes. It's mostly complete. It's as complete as we can make it. You'll see a fairly extensive list of things that were fixed. These are all links to specific bug reports. So here's one that was a crash on undoing the removal of a horizontal frame. Here's a crash that happened if you were editing a bracket and then pressed save. Here's one that happens if you stop playback while you're loading a sound font and then doing something. And each one of these you could click on to get more information on. Here's one if you play a score and then close it while the synthesizer is still loading. Here's one where it crashed if you inserted measures that exactly amounted to one system. So I think like 18 measures. If you insert 18 measures, they would take up exactly one system. If you do that and then undo and then redo, that would crash, and that's fixed. You can click on any of these reports and see the information where here's someone who submitted a report told you exactly how to do it. So take a score, insert 18 measures, undo, and then redo. That would cause a crash. So anyhow, this bug is fixed. So you can see that list of things that were crashed. And of course, these are only the things fixed since 3.05. 3.05 fixed some crashes that were in 3.04. 3.04 fixed some crashes that were in 3.03. 3.03 fixed some that were in 3.02, etc. So overall, it should be less, there should be fewer crashes in 3.1 than any of the previous MuseScore 3 releases. I don't know, compared to MuseScore 2, I can get that to crash also, but we take the crashes very seriously, and anyone that someone can give us steps to reproduce, we can usually figure out how to fix it. So yeah, if you've got a crash that's not already fixed, make sure it's reported. If it's not reported, go ahead and go to the issue tracker and give us the steps to reproduce the crash, and we'll take a look. So that's MuseScore 3.1, and it's going to be really great. You're going to really enjoy it when it comes out, but I encourage you to start playing with it now and give us your feedback. So meanwhile then, it's time to me to get back to work on other things. So I'm going to sign off for now, and next week, yep, I don't have anything particular in mind to talk about next week. Always open to suggestions. So yeah, whatever occurs to me, or whatever someone suggests to me, I'm happy to talk about next week. So until then, I hope you have a great week, and I will see you then. Bye.